honored today to have with us longtime HAT member Wei Djao to speak with us about her area of scholarship and passion, ancient Chinese philosophy. Her talk today will be on the atheist origin of the universe in the book of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu was active about 500 BCE. In his book of Lao Tzu, also known as the Tao Te Ching, he presented what is probably the earliest recorded view of an atheist origin of the universe. Wei will be describing Lao Tzu's views, their significance over the centuries to the present, and how they continue to be relevant for people of all cultures. The second edition of Wei's book, A Humanist Path, Confucius and Lao Tzu for Today, was published by Ginger Post World in 2022 in paperback and ebook formats. Now, if you would please unmute your mic and join me in welcoming to the HAT Forum, Wei Djao, the atheist origin of the universe in the book of Lao Tzu.
Okay, this is the title page, and the character on the side is Dao. Literal meaning is the path, but in the hands of Lao Tzu, it has become a school of thought. I'm dedicating this presentation to Betty Bastien. She is a dear friend since the 1970s. I learned not only the history and philosophy of the First Nations from her, but more particularly Blackfoot culture. And one idea that I want to share with you today, what I learned from Betty Bastien, the misinterpretation of non-Christian cultures by early Christian missionaries in this way. Cultural values were misread and then presented to the public as religious beliefs. In other words, a lot of the non-Christian cultural values were presented as religious beliefs. I'm just starting a book called Indigenous Toronto. It's the history of Toronto from an Indigenous point of view. And the author reviewed some of the historical accounts of Toronto from non-Indigenous perspectives. Right away, talking about religious beliefs. So what you have heard as Chinese beliefs or Indigenous beliefs, think in terms of values. I am not a philosopher by trade. My trade is sociology, but I am very interested in philosophy and literature of China. And here is also my gratitude to my mother, who taught me, was the first teacher of my English and classical Chinese teacher. So I will begin with a definition, a sociological definition of beliefs. It is any ideas that cannot be proven or refuted, and those ideas must be taken on faith. I think we use the word believe rather loosely. I believe the sun is going to shine today. No, that's you trust, you think, because from past experiences, beliefs are those things that must be taken on faith. And in that sense, beliefs and superstitions are the same thing. Maybe beliefs are a bit more respectable because they come from organized religions and therefore may have a whole theology behind it. But in terms of the sociological definition, they are the same. Now, Victor Stenger was a physicist who worked on the big island of Hawaii. And he, in his last years of his life, wrote about 4 or 5 books on the new atheism for lay people, not physics. And he is really worthwhile reading. Not so well known among the so-called new atheists, but this is what he wrote about a Chinese version of the beginnings. The Chinese myth of creation comes closer. I'm afraid I can't read my whole screen because I've got people's pictures on the side. I wonder whether maybe I can. Yeah, maybe you can still see all right, right? Okay, the Chinese myth of creation actually comes closer than Genesis, starting in chaos and exploding into an expanding universe. This is from his book. I think this is his last book. He passed away. He died in 2007 or something, sometime about that time, from this book. And I'm not sure where he got the source of for this idea. I'm not sure whether he was referring to the Book of Lao Tzu or to some Chinese myth of the beginnings. If it were from the Book of Lao Tzu, I wish he could have probed a little bit deeper. Okay, Chinese myths of beginnings. There is Pangu, was a giant. He separate the universe was a ball of gases, or something like that. And this giant in the Chinese myth separated heaven and earth. And every day the heaven would ascended 100 feet higher, and the earth would get 100 feet thicker, and he would also grow until, the two, heaven and earth, are quite separate from each other. There are other stories. In other stories, Nuwa, a woman, did this kind of separation, but definitely Nuwa was thought to be responsible of making human beings out of clay and baked them, and there we are. I guess Pangu did not do a very good job in separating heaven and earth. Part of it collapsed, and Nuwa repaired the firmament. These are the stories, and for the most part, I would say no one in China believes it. And as a kid growing up in China, I never heard of these myths until I read them in some book when I was much older. Okay, what did the ancient Chinese believe at the time of Lao Tzu? Animist ideas. Most cultures would have this kind of ideas in antiquity or even now, just that simply live spirits reside in living and non-living things, from hills to lakes to forests to rainfall to house roofs, you name it, and they have it. And some, if they sort of may, talk to their cars, computers, as if there were some spirits, behave yourself, computer, I have an important document to complete, or something like that. But I mean, that's the animist ideas. More seriously, people have souls, and the dead people have those souls wandering around as ghosts, but not too sure where those ghosts actually live or, reside. In the Song Dynasty, which would be about 3,500 to about 3,100 BCE, there was a god of sorts, referred to as Shangdi or Di, meaning king on high. Probably he was the ancestor of the ruling house of the Song dynasty, and in time, his blessings and protection were sought by all of the people. And Shangdi is the name used still today, or rather the Protestants, early missionaries used the term Shangdi, the God on high, to refer to their God. The Catholics and the Muslims and Jews have different names for God. Then as time went on, this idea of heaven or ten displaced Shangdi, and with that, increasing emphasis on human virtues, effort, and rituals. But at the same time, there was also a development of skepticism, questions about spirits and superstitions. And that kind of writing actually appeared around the time of Lao Tzu, or even before. Now, the meaning of heaven, there are actually 5 different meanings. So I'm going to quickly list them. First of all, it's the physical sky, the blue sky, which you can see on the screen since we don't quite have it today. And secondly, in an anthropomorphic sense, it means a God, but a person, kind of. And then heaven would be equivalent to fate or destiny, usually over affairs that people have no control. The naturalistic 10, heaven means the equivalent of the English term, Mother Nature. And also heaven as the embodiment of a principle of morality, a source of morality. Right. Now, these 5 meanings of heaven, I would say, depending on whom you talk to, some Chinese or Chinese in general, some would have some of them, except for the second one, the anthropomorphic sense, unless they belong to one of those religions, the Abrahamic religion. People sometimes, I have used the phrase when there is nothing I can do after I've tried my best. Well, I would say I leave it to heaven, because there is a term that refers to it. It simply sort of the word ten, meaning heaven, is kind of general, but some of these other meanings might still exist. But it takes empirical research to really verify that. The time periods we are talking about, the Song dynasty, as you can see, was about this. This is the first dynasty, Xia. I use the term, and the most Chinese would use the term dynasty quite often. It doesn't mean that the Chinese care for the emperors. Most people don't know the names of those emperors, and they are not really well liked. But dynasty used in history sort of points to some specific characteristics of that time period. For example, this period, there was the concept of God, and it was also the period in which Chinese writing was developed. So most people would be quite, interested in this. Now, the periods that we are concerned with, those within the Zhou dynasty, more specifically the spring and autumn period and the Warring States period. As Richard pointed out, it was 500 BCE that Lao Tzu was active, and Confucius too. That particular period, spring and autumn, and followed by the Warring States, is a time of chaos, social chaos. At the beginning of the Zhou dynasty, the king kind of assigned territories to his relatives, uncles, cousins, and sons, and so on, and also meritorious generals, and so on. And so there were really hundreds of those states. But over time, the stronger lords came to swallow up the weaker states. And so there was a lot of war. And not surprisingly, around this time, a lot of philosophers appeared. They sort of were trying to figure out why this chaos, why all the sufferings, what kind of government will be best so that this kind of thing will not happen again. And so you have to see the origins of the two major traditions, philosophical traditions in China, Confucius and Lao Tzu, as coming from that background. And then by 221 is, of course, the beginning of the unified China, and that's done by the first emperor. Lao Tzu, the book itself, I just want to say a few things. The whole thing is 5,250 words, so it's not a long book. And it's written more or less in poetry form. There are 81 chapters. The first 37 chapters are about Tao, which we hope to explain a little bit in the next half hour. And Da is the expression of Tao in people's behavior, as well as in the behavior of all living things, and all that happens sort of is the it has more commentaries written about it than any other book in China, from ancient China or from modern China. And it's the most translated book, Chinese book, into foreign languages. And this is really critical. The Book of Lao Tzu is kind of indispensable if you want to understand China or anything Chinese. One of the translators that I recommend has this to say about the book. No one can hope to understand Chinese philosophy, religion, government, art, medicine, or even cooking without a real appreciation of the profound philosophy taught in this book. I'm reminded of this all the time because many world leaders really have no idea what are the Chinese, who are the Chinese, what are the Chinese doing. It would be well for them to take a look at this book. Okay, Lao Tzu, the person, he was a historical person, as was mentioned before, about 500 BCE, but he has been mystified by the Taoist religion. I will come back to the Taoist religion later. He was a native of the state of Chu. As I mentioned, there were different states. This state of Chu was in the southern part of China, south of the Long River, where actually Mao Zedong came from. It was naturally endowed with warm climate and rivers and lakes, so people had more or less an easy life in terms of agriculture. And their style of writing, their outlook would be quite different from the northern states. Lao Tzu worked as an archivist or librarian in the king's library, so he had access to a lot of the ancient writings, including all the records in astronomy. He is said to have met Confucius once, but he was somewhat older than, maybe about 25, 30 years older than Confucius. We don't know much about Lao Tzu, really, about his birth date or death date or anything of that kind. But as I mentioned, he was one of those philosophers that came about around 400, 500 BCE. Taoist philosophy, and this is one of my pet peeves, there's no such a thing as Taoism. You will find it in all kinds of writings. You can't translate this word into Chinese. It basically means the ideology of Tao, whatever that meant. People will not understand you. There is Taoist philosophy that came out of Lao Tzu and some of the other philosophers after him. And then there is that Taoist religion, but please don't use it. Don't use the word Taoism, at least not in my hearing, please. The ideas of Lao Tzu are recorded in this book of Lao Tzu, which is also known as Tao Te Ching or Tao Te Ching, depending on how it's romanized. Jing means classics or almost a religious text. It is different from Taoist religion, and most websites still list Lao Tzu as the founder of Taoist religion. Okay, Taoist religion, as I've mentioned many times now, 500 BCE. The religion was founded around 140 Common Era. That's quite a few years, quite a few hundred years after Lao Tzu, by Zhang Daoling and some other people also named Zhang, and it was in the context of a peasant rebellion. The religion incorporates elements of animism and shamanism, and it imitated Buddhist religion in ceremony, scriptures, and architecture. And there were a lot of Buddhist scriptures. And one of the things that the Buddhists in China did was to go to India to get Buddhist scriptures, sort of trying to get at the source. And so there were a lot of Buddhist scriptures. And the Taoist religion proceeded to imitate that too. The founder Zhang reputedly wrote, I don't know how many volumes, over 100 volumes of scriptures. But it also included the Book of Lao Tzu as a foundational text. And Lao Tzu becomes the founder. He is worshipped by the people in the Taoist religion. And to this day, even in China, people kind of confuse Taoist religion and Taoist philosophy. But I just want to make it quite clear, although Lao Tzu is kind of claimed by the people in the Taoist religion as their founder and some of his teachings, but it's really quite different. I may not get to that slide at the end, but I just want to mention one difference. For example, in the Taoist religion, the aim is to become an immortal. You live on and on and on, no death. But what Lao Tzu did, one of the few times he mentions death, most of the times in talking about death, he was talking about warfare, the battlefields, how unsustainable that is. That's how horrible it was. The only time he talked about death was those who follow the way of the Tao, even if they die, they have so longevity, long life. By that, in other words, no paradise, no heaven, no immortality, but simply long life. And long life here means the continual existence of the guiding principle which kind of inspired this person. And so you can see it's really quite different. So as you go to the websites, you will still find out as the founder of the Taoist religion. Okay, here is the main idea of my talk, because it's the main idea in the book of Lao Tzu. The central idea in the book is the origin and development of the universe. And the origin is more the self-generation, the sort of self-production of the universe. And we will look at some of these chapters in the book of Lao Tzu. Then other ideas in the book, the Tao refers to the laws of nature and also includes all social and political rules, laws, or the ideal ways of conducting social and political affairs. These two ideas, the second and the third, are found in other schools of thought, but only the book of Lao Tzu has this self-generation and development of the universe. And then, of course, the idea that people should follow the way of this universe. That's about the Tao. The Da is the power or virtue, the expression of Tao in everything. Most of the book, as I mentioned, only 37 chapters, more or less, about Tao. The rest of the book, of the 81 chapters, about Da. So there is really nothing supernatural in that book. It's concerned with good government and peaceful, simple living. It's kind of addressed to those who were and who would want to be rulers or political leaders. So it's really very down to earth in many ways, except the language sometimes could confuse people. The book also contains many pairs of opposites, long and short, high and low, hard and soft, and so on and so forth. And in the book, usually it seems to prefer the lower terms, that is weak rather than strong, and soft rather than hard, and so on. We may not get to it today, but that's there. Advice, the rest of the book on the advice of being good leaders, such as the compassion, the three treasures, compassion, frugality, and not being first. So I will read some of, I have some chapters of the book of Lao Tzu prepared. I will read the first one and the last two, the shorter ones. And I'm asking Richard to read the two longer chapters. Okay, chapter one is, you can see why people might think that this is religious, because it's rather abstract, and more so because it reuses kind of philosophical ideas. Okay. The path that is Tao, accepted as the way or the teaching, cannot be the lasting Tao. The name that can be named is not the lasting name. Non-being, meaning not existing or nothing, is the origin of heaven and earth. Being, that is existence or something, is the mother of all things. Through the non-being, we see the intriguing subtlety of Tao. In being, we have an inkling of its limitless vastness. I want to bring this chapter 1 up because these two ideas, nothing and something, are repeated in the book. Nothing, not existing. And yet the universe, heaven and earth, refer to the universe, come out of that nothing. So the question is, how could something come out of nothing? Well, the key is that in that nothing, there is a potential. And that is what, that's what universe comes from nothing. And once there's the universe, then you have all the things, the mother of all things. This first line is, there are several different interpretations. And usually you will see that the Tao that can be spoken as Tao is not the lasting Tao. There is some question as to whether or not it's really meant that way. But in a way, the second line is easier to understand. A name that can be named is not the lasting name. Tao is that potential from which the universe developed. And because the universe is now so vast, so big, you really cannot call whatever that's the origin by a name. If you call anything a name, a lamp, a tree, a stone, it's limited to that thing. And we'll come back to this idea that it's hard to talk about what sort of from which the universe came from. Okay, Richard, would you please take over the reading of chapter 25?
Yes, thank you, Wei.
Thank you.
Self-generation of Tao, chapter 25. There is a thing that is mixed, confused, or in chaos. It exists before heaven and earth. It is soundless and formless. It exists by itself without changing. It's always in motion without ceasing. I do not know its name. I reluctantly call it Tao. If I were compelled to give it a name, it would be big. Being big, it is constantly moving. In motion, it goes far and wide. Going far and wide, it returns to its origin. So Tao is great. Heaven is great. Earth is great. People are also great. There are 4 great entities within space, and people are one of them. People follow the laws of the earth. Earth follows the laws of heaven. Heaven follows the laws of Tao. Tao follows itself as it always does naturally.
Okay. I just want to mention the last 2 words in this chapter, 自然. Most translations would say that, as it's given here, or Tao follows nature. 自然, it's difficult, well, put it this way. At the time of Lao Tzu, it probably meant more than just natural or naturally. Ran, the second character, means it becomes so. Depending on what you put in front of it, it could mean how, or it could mean why, or it could mean, of course it is so. But this word, the word that precedes it, 自 means self. if this word is followed by another word, it would mean selfish, as the self in the English word selfish. So 自然 means that Tao follows the laws that it itself has generated. So the two words here means very much that it follows its own laws. It developed by itself. No one had any hand producing it. So this is what I refer to as the self-generation of the universe from that which is nothing, but only a potential. Okay, chapter 14, Richard, please.
Yes, thank you, Wei. Another description of Tao, chapter 14. That which cannot be seen is considered invisible. That which cannot be heard is regarded as inaudible. That which cannot be touched is called minuscule. As there is no way of probing these three qualities of Tao, it is called the One, amalgamated. Its upper part is not bright, nor is its underside dark. Unfathomably vast and dim, defying the possibility of any name, it reverts to nothing. This is the shape without shape. This is the image of nothing. Therefore, it is called obscure and dim. Approach it, one does not see its head. Follow it, one does not see its tail. Apply the ancient Tao that has always existed to drive everything that exists today. If one can understand the beginning of the universe, one knows the way of Tao.
Yeah, you can see that at the hands of some people, this can easily be twisted to mean God, as the early Christian missionaries did. And the Book of Lao Tzu was taken to be the Chinese Bible. I'm not kidding. That's how it was presented for a while. Okay, chapter 4, this is a very short chapter, and I will read it. Tao is empty, yet its use will never be exhausted. It is unfathomably deep, yet it appears as the origin of all things. It dulls its sharpness, it untangles knots, it blends with light, it mixes with the dust. Indistinct as if it's not there, yet it actually exists. I don't know who produced it, only that it appeared before God, before the Lord. These 4 lines appear in a later chapter, so most people think that they should not be here. But it's not wrong, so I included. But it's very, very certain and very obvious that, okay, we don't know what produced it or how itself produced itself, but it appeared before God or before the Di or Shanti that I mentioned earlier. And throughout the Book of Lao Tzu, especially on the part on the we should behave like Tao, but Tao, because it has energy, it also is for us to use. I don't have the chapter, but I think I mentioned it. One of the things that Lao Tzu said about Tao is that the universe, heaven and earth, and everything under heaven came out of Tao. But Tao, once it has led to the existence of all those things, does not possess those things, nor does it control it. It just exists on its own. And so unlike God or the gods in many religions, it does not meddle in human affairs. Rather, we human beings use whatever energy that's available to us on this planet, the sources of our energy from the food we eat, and therefore from the plants and so on. But it was there before anyone created the gods. And this chapter that I want to read is the whole thing consists of 4 lines. Turning back is how Dao moves. Weakness is what Dao uses. Now, here is really the sort of the beginnings of the universe. Heaven, earth, and all things come from being, from the word that means existence. Being comes from non-being. The Chinese character for non-being is actually wu, nothing. So this has certainly puzzled people, but in a minute, I would like to briefly go over the ideas in the Big Bang Theory, and you can perhaps understand that better. In chapter 40 is everything, you can say everything comes from something, something comes from nothing. So that's really the crux in the book of Lao Tzu about the beginning of the universe. Now, the current knowledge is, of course, the Big Bang Theory. The first one I want to mention is, of course, Gilles Lemaitre, who is considered as the father of the Big Bang Theory. He studied to become a civil engineering. He served in the military as an officer during the First World War. Then after the war, he entered the cemetery and became a Roman Catholic priest. He was Belgian. And he was a scientist. He was very interested in astronomy. And this picture was taken, of course, with Albert Einstein in 1933. I think when he was in the United States on the visit, he looked at some of the things that the astronomer Hubble was seeing. And what he said about the universe, from what he observed and from his calculations, the universe was expanding and expanding at an increasing speed, faster and faster. And that was, that was before his visit to the United States, but that was in the early 1920s. Now, this idea was not accepted by Einstein. Einstein, although he gave us the concept of space-time and general theory of relativity, he had, I just saw this in a documentary yesterday, one commentator mentioned that he had some sort of assumptions, and that is the universe was stable and static. He may be, I don't know whether he actually wrote those things, but that was his idea. So he disagreed with Lemaitre, and he thought, he was wrong. But over time, by the end of the 1920s, he came to accept the fact that the universe was expanding, and it was expanding faster and faster. I just want to give a comment. Yeah, most people do not like to change their mind. Yeah, I know that sort of my ideas are my ideas. I don't like to change, but it really is a sign of intelligence. It's an intelligent person who can say, well, my thinking was not so accurate, was wrong. I know better now. I have better knowledge. So I changed my way of thinking. And I want to say that many of us in this Zoom room are also intelligent. Some of us were believers, had religious beliefs. And when we knew better, we changed our thinking. And in the history of intellectual development, there were some people who did change their mind for the benefit of all of us. So Albert Einstein came to accept the expanding universe by the late 1920s. Now, if you think of the universe as expanding, moving very faster, moving faster and faster all the time, then if you go back in time, the universe will be smaller and slower to the point that there was only one point. Stephen Hawking worked out the mathematics of the Big Bang Theory, and I don't know whether it's from him or from someone else, but it's estimated to be about 13.7 to 13.8 billion years ago. That's when the universe began, and it began from a point. And this is not a typo, but this is really the point. And the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, who wrote a couple of books in astrophysics for the lay people, like for people like me, had this to say about the beginning of the universe in our current knowledge. All the space and all the matter and all the energy of the known universe was contained in a volume less than 1/trillionth the size of the period that ends this sentence. Now, on the screen, this period is somewhat larger than in a print book. So probably it's 1/trillionth of this. That was the very beginning of the universe. And then through other actions in the universe, the birth and the collapse and the death of stars, we had the beginnings of the elements, the chemical elements that we have in our planet. And these are two quotes I got from two astrophysicists who also wrote for lay people. This is from Carl Sagan. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. Yeah, we are bits of stardust. If you want to be romantic about it, that's where we came from. And Stephen Hawking had this to say: we are really the sons and daughters of stars. So I'm putting about 13.8 billion years of development into about 5 minutes. So please pardon my ignorance and my summarizing this development. Now, you can see some parallels between the current knowledge of the Big Bang Theory and the ideas in the Book of Lao Tzu. And the question is the sources of thinking in the book of Lao Tzu and the significance of the book for today. There were some social factors, and we'll discuss them, the social class and cultural milieu. And then the knowledge bases, the sources of knowledge, and that, of course, has implications for later periods up to today. The branches of knowledge were astronomy, medicine and the human body, agriculture, and I have alluded to that, questions about beliefs and superstitions, sort of not perhaps codified or systematized, but there were people always questioning some of those things. Okay, the social factors. The followers of Lao Tzu are the Taoist philosophers. For Lao Tzu and his contemporaries, and also during the period of warring states, sort of those who followed his thinking and continued to do astronomy or medicine, or those who sort of followed his way of thinking, they were most likely from the lower echelons of the aristocracy. They had land holdings given to them at the very beginning of the Zhou dynasty, but decreasing in size of those land holdings. So they were probably also, engaged in farming to some extent, to a greater or lesser extent. And therefore, they were independent producers. They could hold their own, but the danger of losing their land was always there. But us, the minor aristocrats, they were educated. And as educated people, they became officials, they were magistrates, tax collectors, you name it, secretaries in various government departments and whatnot. But one of those officials is very important, and that is called officials of skies. There is actually a position and actually a department or a bureau of the officials of skies. And they were charged to study the skies and to tell the rulers what they saw. Some of them were astrologists, in the sense they were supposed to interpret the luck or ill luck of what the heavenly bodies were holding in store for the rulers. But the thing is, to do that kind of studying, they were also astronomers. I would like to see that as kind of a continuum, sort of people may move back and forth between these two ends. And Lao Tzu and his followers became perhaps much more of astronomers, but there were also those who were astrologists. I looked online for some of those astronomers after Lao Tzu in the 4th century or 5th century BCE. Invariably in English, the websites would say they were astrologists, kind of almost denying the valuable contributions those people made to astronomy. We saw that Father Lemaitre was a priest, but the way he explained his position was that the Bible is not a book of science. So, so if the Bible says some of things relating to science, he was able to compartmentalize his thinking. And I think we should at least give some room for that kind of maneuver. in the individuals. Of course, we don't know for sure, but for Lao Tzu to have those ideas, I think he was not so much an astrologist. I don't know whether he was an official of the skies, but he certainly had access to a lot of the documents of the librarian. Now, a lot of the followers or the Taoist philosophers, they were also described as recluses. Recluse is not quite the hermit in, say, the Christian tradition, sort of living out in the desert and by oneself. It's rather they were reclused from officialdom. They retired from being an official. So they have friends, they would eat and drink with their friends and family, but they were just not part of the officialdom, mostly because they were dissatisfied with the government of the day. And another social factor was philosophy in China takes the place filled by religions in other cultures. In my previous presentation a few years ago, I kind of went over this, so I'm not going to get into now. So followers of Lao Tzu were described in the historical records by this historian, Sima Qian, who lived during those years. He was an official of the skies. And he was the one who gave Lao Tzu's philosophical ideas the name of Taoist. All the other philosophers will claim they have the Tao of this, the Tao of that. They all use the word Tao in the sense of a school of thought. But Sima Qian was the only one who says that Lao Tzu's ideas were that of Tao. In other words, Lao Tzu did not claim his philosophy to be Taoist. And he described those followers of Lao Tzu in the centuries after Lao Tzu. The thing is, the book, an ancient book, well, Lao Tzu didn't write his book. He most likely taught, and his followers wrote down, just like Confucius' sayings were written down by his followers. So the book itself was several centuries in the making. And so there were some ideas which were of the later period, but most of the ideas in the book of Lao Tzu were those from Lao Tzu's period or even earlier than Lao Tzu. But in the first and second centuries of BCE, Sima Qian described those Taoist philosophers as they focus on vital force and mental energy. And I just want to mention this. I told you to HAC members that I do sort of, if you want to call it meditation or silent sitting every day, morning and evening. Now, this kind of sitting is definitely done by Buddhists, first by the Chinese Buddhists and now by the Japanese Buddhists. But the fact that they took over this kind of practice from the Taoists doesn't make it any less valid. The early Christians took over, you can say, the festival of winter solstice and have Jesus' birthday around that time. But that wouldn't prevent me. I like winter solstice because it's turning around, the beginning of spring to me. So what is important is these Taoists would, through breathing exercise and through sitting, nurture their mental energy so that they can concentrate and they can also better their physical energy. This is the part that came from medicine or the human body knowledge. They were skilled in observing everything. They followed the changes of seasons. We'll see in a minute when we talk about the astronomy, why it developed, and it followed the development of all natural things. Significance of the Book of Laws in China and historically is the development of astronomy and also the atheist cultural environment with rejection of animistic superstitions. And for today, very broadly speaking, the significance of the book is that it does not describe the Big Bang theory, but it is compatible with it. And it therefore renders humanist ideas more acceptable to people today. Now, some of the people of the past who kind of very strongly rejected the ideas of spirits or the supernatural. One of them was Shunzi. He is usually considered a Confucianist, but his ideas about the natural phenomena are very much those of Lao Tzu. So he wrote this, weather conditions will be the same, whether people pray for rain or not. Prayers, sacrifices, and divination in times of drought or solar and lunar eclipses really have no effect on these natural phenomena. Those phenomena are merely, I'm sorry, not the natural phenomena. The prayers, sacrifices, and so on are merely ways of adorning the natural events with decorum, that is, with eloquent words and elegant rituals by the rulers and the officials, while the people may believe in spirits and ghosts playing a part in natural disasters. So what Shunzi is saying is that those natural disasters, drought or whatever, a famine or so on, can be interpreted in two ways. One is by the scholars and the masters they served, that is the rulers, and they work up a storm of words to make those things, prayers, and so on, not only necessary, but kind of beautiful to accept. Whereas the common folks who were less educated would take them as sort of what's happening, what was ordained by the spirits. I can go on and on about him because I really like what he was saying. This other guy, Fan Zhen, was, he was writing at the time Buddhist religion was becoming more accepted in China. And the Buddhists, of course, talked about souls, the spirits, especially of the dead. And he, that dualism, body and soul. And he, Fan Zhen was very, emphatic that body is the substance, the soul is a quality of the body. It is like a knife. The blade of the knife is real, is substantial, but sharpness is a quality or a property of the blade. If you take away the blade, the sharpness doesn't exist. the only way it can exist is I kind of imagine, the Marx Brothers or Mr. Bean going around catching just the sharpness in a comedy skit. But the thing is, Fan has a point. You cannot talk about the spirit if the body is dead. And there were others who continued this kind of tradition of questioning the existence of spirits. So let's talk a little bit about astronomy. That and the Lao Tzu's ideas, they kind of have reciprocal influence. Astronomy, I think, helped Lao Tzu develop some of those ideas, and Lao Tzu's ideas also reinforced, became a inspiring source of inspiration for astronomy. Now, China, of course, had no telescope until it came from the West. Yet records of comets, sunspots, and star explosions, it has the longer and the most valuable to modern study of the history of the universe. I think I butchered that line. So observations and reason led to greater knowledge. And this is true whether in the case of the ancient astronomers or in any kind of modern student who is serious about looking for truth and using reason. So the search for truth and rejection of beliefs, superstitions reinforce each other. And this is true whether in ancient China or around the world. So Chinese astronomy, the purpose is to regulate agriculture and to predict when eclipses would occur, which would consolidate the ruler's power if the ruler was able to predict the solar or the lunar eclipse. And very important was the idea of to produce and refine a calendar that's of use to agriculture. Now, the Chinese calendar is solar and lunar. But when people talk about the Lunar New Year, I don't know what calendar they are talking about, because Chinese calendar is both solar and lunar. The oldest Chinese calendar, according to tradition, was devised 4,600 years ago. It was before the writing came into existence, and the cycle of 60 years. And in Chinese calendar, it is still followed the cycle of 60 years. Around 1400 BCE, there was the use of stars to mark the four seasons. This is in writing, in archaic writing on the shells, tortoise shells or bones of animals. So this is much more reliable than this date. And about 1400 BCE, the Chinese calculated the length of a year as 365.25 days in a tropical year. A tropical year is different from our present calendar year in the sense that a tropical year is the amount of time that the sun is observed from Earth to return to the same position. For example, from summer solstice to summer solstice. And that is the tropical year, sort of a point of view from Earth. The Chinese at that time probably had no idea that the Earth was revolving around the sun and those planets were doing the same thing. But it is from observing. In Chinese astronomy, very early, before 5,000 years ago, the pottery remains of the Neolithic culture. the sun was very important. These are the inscriptions on bones and tortoise shells I was talking about. And there were already recorded solar and lunar eclipses. Shortly, in a couple of centuries after Lao Tzu, the Chinese had some explanations. For example, they figured out that the lunar eclipse is really the shadow of the Earth. And so, before Lao Tzu's time, people were already predicting the solar and lunar eclipses. Comets, these are, of course, fantastic phenomena in the skies. The Chinese astronomers recorded Halley's Comet first in 613 BCE, then again in 467 BCE. And each of the subsequent 29 appearances between 340 BCE and 1910, it appeared about every 76 years. By 1910, the Chinese records showed reports of Halley's and other comets 500 times. In the West, I think the first confirmed record was in the Bayeux tapestry made in France to record the event of the conquest by William. Now, the nebula or the supernova. This is not from the James Webb Space Telescope. It's from one of the earlier ones, Spitzer or whatever. It's the Crab Nebula. The Chinese called the guest stars, called the novas and supernovas guest stars. Comets were a sign of bad luck. Guest stars, they are kind of welcome because they are so polite. They come on, they stay for a while, then they disappear. So they were called guest stars. 90 of those novae were mentioned in Chinese records from 15th century BCE to 1700 CE. Novae were recorded in the writings of other countries, but the Chinese records named month and celestial location. The Crab Nebula was the most impressive, and it is in the Bayeux tapestry. And the idea that the nova, this Crab Nebula was the remnants of a supernova was supported by Chinese written evidence when astrophysicists were studying the beginnings of the nebula. So the history of astronomy was, you can say, well kept in Chinese records. And astrophysicists, they kind of still refer to it sometimes. For example, they find that the angle of the Halley's Comet recorded in Chinese records would be somewhat different from today's. I think the last comet Halley's Comet was, I think, 1980s. Now, the planets, movements of planets recorded here. This is, of course, a reprint of a book. And in the 4th century BCE, Ganda, the astronomer, claimed to have seen the moons of Jupiter, the 4 large moons. I think today the astronomers, maybe Kay would know better, I don't know, 70 or over 100 moons of Jupiter. And of course, those four big ones were discovered by Galileo with his telescope. But at that time, what the Chinese astronomers were doing was the only thing that helped them in observing the skies were a hollow bamboo hole. And that's all they had. It wouldn't enlarge the images, but it would help them focus. Now, of course, today in the websites, you will say, well, those are astrologers. They were making up things. It's not possible. But actually, in the 19th century, an English astronomer, I think, I don't remember the name, also mentioned that Jupiter's moons could be seen with the naked eye without the telescope. I guess you have to know when to look, when those moons are aligned in such a way and so on. So here are some records from ancient Chinese astronomy. The meteorites, the earliest record of meteor showers was on the fourth month in this year, 687 BCE. A total of 180 meteorite showers recorded in Chinese documents. And the Chinese wrote that meteors dropped on Earth became iron or stone. King Tut, Tutankhamun, in his burial chamber, there was a dagger made of iron. And modern science had figured out that it was iron from a meteorite. And that is because meteorite iron has higher content of nickel and also has about 10% of cobalt. Whereas the iron you usually mine from the earth wouldn't have that cobalt, and the content of nickel will be a lot less. So the conclusion is that that dagger was made of meteorite iron. It could have been given to him by the Assyrian king, or the Egyptians fashioned that dagger from the meteorite. Now in China, not at Tutankhamun's time, I think later during the Song Dynasty, there was a mirror of bronze. The Chinese would polish the bronze and use that surface as a mirror. So the front would be a mirror and the back was iron. And tests showed that the iron was also from a meteorite. So, astronomy and other technologies kind of went hand in hand. Another aspect of
Excuse me, Wei. We want to have time for questions and discussion here, certainly. So if you can make sure that we are
we are on
finishing
the
up very soon.
second to the last slides. I just want to mention, okay, very quickly, that sunspots were recorded very early, and auroras from this journal states also about, almost 1,000 years ago. Now, so why all this? Coming from the book of Lao Tzu, with his atheist beginnings, if you want to take advice from anyone, would you take it from someone like Bangu, who has a fantastic story of separating heaven and earth, or you would take it from Lao Tzu? And the book has really much more to say about the expression of Tao, and I won't have time to go over some of my favorite ones, but I just want to mention this chapter 8 and 78, water. He advises people to be like water. As you know, water seeks its own level, so it always goes down and occupy the lowest place. So doing good is to be like water, to occupy a low place, do things that are beneficial for others, but don't claim, don't, aggrandize yourself. Don't claim, don't be arrogant and claim sort of rewards. And water, on the other hand, is the softest of all things, and yet you can overcome many hard things. So thank you. I hope I didn't bore you too much, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of the things I like. That's it. Here are some authors if you want to look at them. I won't be reading your chats because for today, but if you want, I can put this in a forum, which translations you could use and some of the books on the universe.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Wei. Please, everyone, open your mics now and give Wei a round of applause for her talk today.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
you.
Wei. Now, we have time for questions and some discussion here. So certainly, if you have a question or a discussion point, please raise your hand. As a couple of people have already done.
Can we stop sharing the screen, please?
Yes, of course. Wei, if you can stop sharing the screen.
Okay. Can I?
All right. Well, just I know you've been waiting patiently, George. So I think George has a question or comment.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, George.
Okay. And I'm not going to talk about religion because some believe, but some don't believe. So I don't want to talk about the religion. And also, I don't want to talk about the Edo era at that time, the Edo era at that time. You know, time is changed. Now we are living in a digital world. Now we are living in a digital world. Everything changed, right? So I don't want to talk about the Edo era at that time. And I want to explain about Lao Tzu's philosophy. And I want the Tao means the way, the road, or even very evident, or as well as theory or all the names, something like that. That's the Tao's, the meaning, the way, the road. But I just want to simplify. Tao's philosophy. And Tao philosophy means everything not permanent. Everything not permanent. And everything are all changing, time by time, time to time. Everything changing. Somewhat like we are living in a digital world. That is why the thing changed, that we can live in a digital world, right? So everything is changing. Taoist philosophy. And it like the philosophy about the relativity that Eastern said. It shows that there is nothing absolute in the world. Nothing absolute in the world, right? So you can say that everything that is will be absolutely right or wrong. So everything changed actually. Someone like I can give an example. Someone
Well,
like
George, we don't necessarily have time for you to give another talk on Taoism or Taoist philosophy at the moment. Do you have a question for Wei, or an observation about Tao, or about Tao Te Ching?
observation about Tao?
About my talk.
About the talk today. Yeah.
About the talk, right?
Yeah. Do you have a
The basic philosophy is Tao told us that everything is no absolutely, and everything is changing.
okay?
Even though the theory sometimes is changing. Someone like, for example, for former time, the medicine and the vitamin, someone like the doctor always issue the antibiotic to the patient, or penicillin to the patient. But today, the doctor not always issue this medicine to the patient, but this is not completely or 100% good for the patient. So even medicine is changed today, right? And everything changes, or technology is also changed every time. The Tao meaning is that everything not completely no change. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, George. Wade, any comment on George's comment?
No, he's right.
He's right. Okay, excellent. Elka, thanks for waiting. Your question, please.
Yeah, I have a comment about the beginning of the presentation and a comment about the end. So the beginning, in chapter 1, we're told that being is the mother of all things. And in chapter 40, that being comes from non-being for nothing, which is, of course, contemporary existentialism, because the notion that being or existence precedes essence is the axiom of existentialism. So that can be seen as a foundation of contemporary existentialism. The other comment I want to make is about near the end of the talk, where we have Fan saying that if there is no spirit, there is no body, and making the analogy with there's no sharpness if there is no knife. So it's an analogy, and it only holds to the extent that these statements are true and that relate appropriately. So we'd have to say that no spirit is to no sharpness, as no body is to no knife. And I don't think the analogy holds there. So I'm happy with the existentialism, but I'm not happy with the soul and the knife.
Thank you, Alka. I thank you for that first part about existentialism. That's very true. Fan is he has just that one essay, and the title of the essay is "The Extinguishing of Spirits." I can see your argument, and okay, I don't know how to defend him. I'm not a philosopher, and so I agree with you, and I see his point of the sharpness only resides in the blade of the knife.
And I'm not quibbling with his conclusions. I'm quibbling with his choice of example. That could have been their choice, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elka. Victor, question or comment from you?
Yeah, several. Let's see if I can do it fast. First of all, I will apologize for my ignorance. So there, I mean, my association of Tao comes from the 1960s American mystics, people that were experimented with psychedelic drugs, and so there I have this association between Tao and New Age. Therefore, I'm suspicious about what Taoism is. I see your presentation, and it hasn't. I see more as a poetry, the work of Lao Tzu, because as a science has absolutely no value since he did not have observations. They are it's nice poetry, but has absolutely no scientific values. When you give the example of Einstein changing his mind, it's not through an intellectual exercise, it's because the evidence of data prove him wrong. And Lao Tzu is saying all these things that sounds very beautiful without absolutely any evidence. He could not have had evidence of Big Bang because we still don't know if the Big Bang is correct. Actually, the latest observations from the Webb telescope seems to shed doubt on the age of the universe. So this 13 billion years old is even not true. So we still don't know things and how things started with the benefit of a lot of observations. And therefore I would take Lao Tzu as poetry and very beautiful and maybe inspired, but not a iota of scientific value. Also, I don't know the role of a translation in all these, because I heard about comments on people translating the Hebrew Bible and reading things in the number of letters between this and that and the number of words. So translations affect, the translator is a traitor. Once you translate something into another language, unfortunately, much is lost. So my ignorant appreciation of this through English is probably a very poor way of appreciating the work. Two more
Can I
short.
respond now, since we are running kind of short on time? Have you got another point?
Yes.
Please.
If I were to consider, natural observations in the absence of religion, I probably will tend towards animism, because it looks like, there is a concept of me and there are other people, there are animals that are separated than me, and it seems like a natural extension that other beings, other objects have also animals, and in that sense, Lao Tzu seems to be far-fetched. The last one is about a comment you make about indigenous. This has not. You mentioned in your talk, it has nothing to do with Lao Tzu book, but it's about the relation between culture and religion. When the invaders, European invaders, came to the world, to outside Europe, their culture and their religion were one and the same. So it makes sense that they see all culture through religion. They came with the sword and the cross. So they saw no distinction between culture and religion, and therefore they interpret much of culture through their understanding. And I don't think that it's a mistake. It's just the times they live in and the information they have access to. Now
Thank you, Victor, for your comments. My immediate reaction is, I hope posterity will not judge whatever we produce, whether it's a piece of art or a piece of writing, in that kind of a harsh way that you did. Think about it, 500 BCE, without any of the modern instruments and technology, what we know about the universe today came about in more or less the last 100 years. Okay, and I will certainly disagree with you on that it was just poetry and not based on observations. It was terse poetry, but what he wrote was based on, he taught was based on observations made not only by his contemporaries, but those before him. And so I would certainly disagree with you that there was no observation. Okay, he was a librarian, and people can certainly get lost in a library. And he read what was recorded. Okay, and as I mentioned, the book was many centuries in the making. You know, if you know anything about Homer, for example, he taught maybe 8th centuries before, but you know, the way it was written was quite a bit later. So there were other things worked into this book from the later centuries. So I would say it was not just poetry based on fantasy, but based on observations, limited, without technology, without the instruments of today. And he certainly did a lot of thinking, and that's what he taught. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Victor. We'll go to Kay now. Kay, you have a question or comment for Wei?
Can I respond or?
No, Victor, you had a couple of questions there. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll come back to you if we have time in a little bit.
Yeah, that's
Thanks,
fair.
Victor.
Okay. I really appreciated all of the comments that you had about astronomy, of course. And you know, I'm very much an amateur astronomer, but in studying like the history of astronomy and the information about the birth and death of stars and about different constellations, it's always interesting to see the Chinese contribution to it. You know, the Crab Nebula that you showed, when it was a supernova, and I love that you call them guest stars. That is such a beautiful concept. It actually happened in the year 1054 of the Common Era, and the European astronomers, you know, they learned from the Chinese about the supernovas and how they would turn into nebulas like the Crab Nebula. So I think that's a really great contribution. The other advantage that astronomers like Gangdu had were that they had very dark skies that we don't have. So just want to, I appreciate very much everything you had to say.
Thank you very much, Kay. Yeah, dark skies, of course. What an advantage. Thank you very much, Kay. Catherine, a question from you.
Okay, this is a very a very small question, and just because there was a passage that you read that I didn't understand because the passage was ambiguous the way it was translated into English. So the passage related to this said, only that it appeared to be for the Lord. And I wondered whether that meant, like when you say appear before, at least in my world, like you appear before a judge. And I didn't know whether it meant that, like that there was some kind of interaction, or whether it was just temporal, saying this appeared before we had a concept of the Lord or something like that. Was there something theistic about it or deistic, or was it, do you know what I'm asking?
No, I didn't get your question at all.
Okay, sorry, I'll say it again. When we say appear before, it can mean like I appeared before you to give a presentation, or it can mean I gave my presentation before your presentation. In other words, one involves an interaction and one involves a point in time. And if I'm not explaining it well, Richard, does anyone else get what I'm asking, or no?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, other people do. Maybe they can explain it better.
Yes, I guess Catherine's asking the question of whether it means that those things appeared before the Lord, as in before the concept of a Lord or God, or whether that they
Or
appeared
that,
before the Lord, as in the Lord was witnessing them.
Yes.
okay, the Lord there very much refers to the Shangdi, or the Lord on high, of the concept of God in the Song dynasty. By Lao Tzu's time, that concept was no longer popular. That sort of the principle of morality perhaps would be seen as residing in heaven, just, the sky heaven. But Shangdi, the god, came in the dynasty before his period, so that would be very ancient to him. What he, I think in the sentence, was saying Dao was there before this.
Okay, so it was a
ancient
time, it was a reference to
Yeah,
time.
and you are asking more specifically what it means, that sentence. Okay, in the original Chinese, it's actually, I don't know whose son it is, whose offspring Dao is. It was before the Lord. In other words, what came afterwards, quite often in Chinese usage, is called the offspring or something. For example, those two lines, everything comes out of something and something comes out of nothing. In those two lines, in Chinese, the word is actually giving birth. Everything, something gives birth to all those things, and nothing gives birth to something.
Okay, so it's a translation thing. I get it. Thank you.
Okay, so that, I mean, you can get into another set of difficulties about who's giving birth and whatever, but that's what it is.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. We'll go to Danny, Dan Di Pasquale, for a question.
Hey, Wade, I just want to say that me and my dog, we really enjoyed it. We listened to the whole thing.
Good. We can't quite hear you, Danny.
Oh, I was just gonna say, me and the dog, we watched the whole thing.
Oh, good. Well, I hope you got more out of it than the dog did.
No way, it was a nice history lesson for me. I mean, I had zero, insight into that type of culture. Well, I wouldn't say zero, but I mean, I've often wondered about that, and it was a very nice insight into that. So thank you very much, Wei.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Danny. I had a question, Wei, about perhaps it's more of a general question about culture, I suppose, that a lot of the ancient cultures, Chinese culture, and I know from my limited exposure to Tamil culture as well, that the great books of meaning within those two cultures and many others have been in the form of poetry. And I'm wondering, why is it important that it was just that was the mode of thought within that time period, or was there that poetry captures something different that direct thought or direct description, prose, doesn't capture? Why do you think it was chose to be presented as poetry?
I think that's how things were written down at that time. We think of poetry as a very separate genre, and poets are kind of like a profession. It's a different set of people. In ancient times, those who could read, who could write, would write kind of almost automatically in that poetic form. In the later centuries, the philosophers would write what we call essays, kind of like Xunzi, the atheist I was talking about, he wrote an essay, sort of beginning, middle, and end, and all that sort of thing. But at Lao Tzu's time, he probably talked. He didn't write anything down. He talked. And whoever wrote it down sort of, maybe it's just the common practice to put it into that kind of more elegant style. And that was the writing. As late as the 8th or 9th century Common Era, people were in the Tang Dynasty, people, if they would write a memorial to the emperor, to the court, it would be a poem rather than an essay. So that's what I think was happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. I thought it might maybe have some sort of link to the fact that many of these things were oral traditions, and poetry maybe was easier to remember or to
That could be
digest.
it too. Certainly, it was before the invention of paper, before they had some ink, and they wrote on silk and on bamboo strips, but much of it is committed to the memory chip in our head. And that was, and I think sometimes we do not take oral traditions seriously, or do not give it the value it deserves. When something is given orally and committed to memory, the one giving the instruction actually makes very certain that the student gets it. So the student has to repeat and repeat and repeat so that it's right, it's correct, because that's the only memory chip,
Amazing.
And
Okay.
so poetry would be easier.
Fair enough. All right. Thank you very much, Wei. We're out of time for today. I thank you for being here with the talk today with Wei. And so one more time, I'd like to give Wei our greatest thanks for being here. Certainly look up Wei's book, Humanist Path. Is a book that I had the pleasure to have read during its formation, and want to go back and read. And now, of course, I really want to read the Tao Te Ching as well, because I'm thinking that this is, as Wei says, kind of foundational to Chinese thought and to Chinese culture. As China's influence increases within the world, I think it might behoove all of us to take a view of that book, and to understand better exactly what is going on within the world, in many ways. So again, thank you so much for Wei for giving us a hat talk today. If you want to be a hat talker, if you have some wonderful a bit of expertise within an area that you are passionate about and would like to talk to Hat about, then certainly approach one of the steering committee members like myself, and you too can be a hat talker in future, as Wei has done today. Thank you so much for presenting with us today, Wei.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who had to listen to me. And thank you especially to Richard. He rehearsed with me 2 days ago, and then he spent extra time to make sure that everything would work smoothly. Thank you. Thank you all.
No problem at all. Just a reminder, of course, that we have a couple of really good upcoming events in the forum. On the 18th, we're talking about the Canada's Emergencies Act. Moses Klein has put that together for us. And on the 25th, a very interesting discussion that promises to be quite a magnet for discussion. How should the West participate in ending the war in Ukraine? Presented to us by Karen Lynn. So, of course, come back to our sessions on Saturday. Come to Beyond Believing on Monday night. All the events that are available to you within our humanist community. I'm glad you could be here today. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. Thanks very much.